Then I'll send a message.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Nathan Gorlick, Associate Professor of English and Literature here at UVU. Before we begin, I want to let those of you watching on YouTube know a bit about the structure of our proceedings this afternoon. This virtual speaker series on Mormonism and the Challenges of Whiteness is an academic project in which UVU students read and study some of the most current work of leading scholars and activists on the series' core theme in advance of each scholar's virtual visit. These students are here today in a designated Zoom meeting, and their interventions during the discussion will be prioritized following our speaker's presentation. My colleagues and I will be moderating this discussion and monitoring the event's YouTube live feed for any questions those of you watching there might have. You can type them into the chat window beside the video, and I will ask them on your behalf. Now, I promise I will do my best to include as many of these questions as possible, but because this series is designed as an engaged learning activity for our students, all of whom applied to the program and were selected by the organizing committee, and because we intend our conversation to surround the scholarly materials under consideration, I may not get to your remarks. Please know, however, that we are very grateful for your attendance and your participation, and we are excited to have you at this, our third event, hosted by UVU's Center for the Study of Ethics and co-sponsored by the Department of English and Literature. We also hope you will join us for our fourth installment of this series on April 1st and our culminating roundtable with our students and all four of the panelists from last fall and this spring, more information forthcoming. I want to thank the other members of the organizing committee, Professors Brianne Larson and Boyd Peterson, as well as our principal organizer, Professor Lydia Kerr, all from the English department, Brian Birch from Philosophy and Religious Studies and Director of the Center for the Study of Ethics, and Evan Jones from the Ethics Center for his technical support today. Because Professor Birch is under the weather, he has asked Evan to present some prepared remarks introducing our featured speaker. So Evan, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm Evan Jones. I'm a student in this group and a student at UVU and an employee of the Center for the Study of Ethics. And on behalf of the Center for the Study of Ethics, I'd like to welcome Dr. LaShawn Williams. Dr. Williams is an assistant professor of social work here at Utah Valley University. She's the co-founder of the Black LDS Legacy Committee, which began as a gathering of Black women to share their experiences and faith as Latter-day Saints. This committee has turned into the annual LDS Legacy Conference, which just had its fourth annual event 9 days ago, which was Black Lives Matter in Eternal Truth. Dr. Williams is a contributor and author at Rational Faiths. She started in higher education in 2005, and she studies the use of relationship in the classroom when discussing diversity concepts. She is a licensed clinical social worker and has been a clinician since 2012. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. The Zoom webinar is always exciting because it's just you and the screen. So you can't read the audience. You don't know if people are laughing at your jokes. You don't know if anyone is catching any of the things that are humorous. You don't know if someone's calling HR. You just don't know what's happening. So for those of you in the Zoom, if you will do a little hand clap or thumbs up if you agree, just to give me a little bit of moral support as we kind of go through some of the slides that I've prepared today. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into it. What I really want to be able to focus on is walking you through a process of engagement and analysis so that you're able to better understand a very American or United States faith as it has gone through its identity process. Around 2013, 2014, at the height of, or the culmination of a few events in the US that led to the creation of the Black LDS Legacy Committee, we came together after the verdict to acquit George Zimmerman in the murder of Trayvon Martin happened in July. And we came together because the Sunday after that verdict, the verdict came out on a Friday. The Sunday after that verdict, we all went to church and no one said anything. People went about church as if it was just any other Sunday. And one sister of ours called out to us and said, I don't know if I can do this. No one sees us. No one hears us. No one cares about us. They don't care about our struggle. Why isn't anyone saying anything? We would watch the church speak up, and it flew the Paris flag, the flag from France after Paris suffered a terrorist attack. We saw it respond to other acts of violence that hit other communities. And we wondered, why not ours? Why not Black communities? I started wondering if the church had an identity development process. Specifically, I wondered if as an organization or as an institution, the church was going through an identity development process. And I asked these questions in 2014, and I actually had them prepared as remarks at the Association of Mormon Counselors and Psychotherapists, and again at another event where we were talking about, all things Latter-day Saint. And I haven't had a chance to actually talk through them. So you all are getting the benefit of one of the first times that I'm going to walk you through the identity development process of an American faith, being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I want you to be thinking about what it means to be a Latter-day Saint within the context of being an American, a US-based faith, what white supremacy and whiteness has to do with being a Latter-day Saint, and then how do those two things connect with the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm going to go through a quick timeline, our abbreviated story here. If we look at a couple of key dates and we start thinking about what it means to be a Latter-day Saint, we see our date of establishment, April 6th, 1830. We know the days of 47, July 24th, when the Saints arrived in Utah after having gone through this 17-year process of trying to find and establish and be safe within their home. Then we move into February 5th, 1852, when Brigham Young, as prophet of the church, also as a leader in government, argues for slavery in the Utah Territory. We move up to June 8th, 1978, when the decision to remove the ban on priesthood ordinations and temple ordinances from Black families and Black communities was accomplished. And then October 27th, 2020, President Dallin H. Oaks says the words "Black Lives Matter" at a BYU devotional. I think it was a Tuesday morning. And I'm putting the picture here because if I could just plaster it, I would, all over this PowerPoint. The dates they're semantics, but they're important. Because when you look at the journey of an institution or an organization or a faith, as it were, you're understanding that the church and its growth as an institution does not happen in a vacuum. I have taught in higher ed for the last 15, 16 years, and I can't tell you how many of my students will come into my courses and they will say to me, Dr. Williams, no, I know what it's like to be oppressed. And this is why they have this opinion about why oppression or racism or sexism or any of the isms continue to exist. I know what it's like. I served a mission in insert Black area here, whether it's Detroit or Atlanta or continental Africa or the Caribbean or Southern America or other places in the diaspora. They will tell me I served a mission, I was discriminated against, I know what it feels like, and I got over it. And so what I'll do is I talk with my students consistently about structural versus and systemic versus situational oppression. And I'll talk with my return missionaries and I'll say, did you know you were going to go to that place? Yes, I did, because you get the letter, right? Did you know how long you were going to be there? Yes. All right. Did you stay that long? Did you leave early? I stayed that long. Maybe I came home early. Did you know when you were going to leave? Yes. So you knew that your oppressive experience had a destination, had a beginning, had a middle, and had an end. What I ask my return missionaries to understand when we're talking about race and racism is that Black people, people of color, when we're talking about sexism, women, when we're talking about heterosexism and homophobia and transphobia, LGBTQ communities are still in the middle. We're not at the beginning, we're not at the end. There is no end in date. We're still in the middle. And so that is what makes structural and systemic oppressions different from situational oppression experiences. Doesn't negate them, but it makes them different. And what it requires is for those of us who have escaped or who had an end date to our oppression, it requires an empathy from us to those still in the middle of their oppression experiences. And not only empathy, but a requirement, an obligation, and an expectation to create the end. So as I'm going to walk you through the identity development of this faith, I want you to pay attention to how the faith lives inside the world, but credits itself on being in the world, but not of the world. So when you look at our beginnings, and these again are abbreviated, I'm going to pull from some Mormon scripture. In D&C, Doctrine and Covenants, section 19, verse 21, this part of the verse says, "And I command you that you preach nothing but repentance to this people." People are getting to go and serve on missions, and they're going to go out and take the word of God into all the world, right? "I command you that you preach nothing but repentance." Now, any missionary work, right, that's been sent out has been sent, and it is said, go teach them to repent because they did something. I often talk about Jonah and his missionary experience where he was told to go and preach to the folks in Nineveh, and he didn't want to go because they were evil. They were doing all these things. And he was like, they're not even worth me going to preach to them. How dare you send me? I'm above this, because I tend to resonate with the more knuckleheaded people in the Old Testament than I do with all the holy folks who never get anything right. Nothing against Jesus. I'm just saying I have gone through some things. So I resonate with the folks who have also gone through some things. Look towards Jesus for help and rescuing me from my fallen state. So when Jonah was sent to the folks in Nineveh, he was sent because he didn't like them. And then he was taught a lesson about not going where God told him to go. So when you think about this, in New York in 1829, when Joseph Smith the prophet gets this information and it says, preach nothing but repentance, generally folks are taught to repent because they're doing something wrong. What was happening in the United States, in New York in 1829? A couple hours north in Boston, David Walker wrote The Appeal. It was a widely read, vociferous condemnation of slavery. It was an appeal to the colored citizens of the world. What might that have had to do with preach nothing but repentance to this people? In 1829, Mexico abolished slavery and became a refuge for people who were fleeing slavery in the US. Enslaved Africans fleeing slavery in the US went to Mexico. What does Utah know about fleeing to Mexico? 1830, the population of enslaved persons in the US numbers more than 2 million, making the ratio of free Black people, enslaved Black people, and white people approximately 5 to 1. Why might we need to preach nothing but repentance to a people actively involved in chattel slavery? On enslavement in D&C section 38, through the prophet, it said, "And let every man esteem his brother as himself," verse 24, verse 25, "And I say again unto you, let every man esteem his brother as himself." Verse 26 says, "For what man among you having 12 sons," and it's a parable, it says, "and gives unto one son costly robes, and says, and sit thou here, and gives to another son." Because if you're no respecter of your sons, but you give one son beautiful robes and say, sit you here, you give another son rags and say, sit you here. And how do you do those things to your sons and say to yourself, I am just? The question is asked, or the statement is made, "Behold, you hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries, but ye know not the hearts of men in your own land." In New York in 1831, why might it have been important to understand the hearts of men in your own land? We are not a faith that exists in a vacuum. We are a faith that exists among people. Why might it be important to understand the hearts of men in their own land? Last time, this comes from like the Civil War prophecy chapter is how this one is known in part. The subheading reads, Revelation and Prophecy on War. This is Kirtland, Ohio, 1832, December 25th, 1832. Given through Joseph Smith, the prophet, at or near Kirtland, Ohio, December 25th, 1832. At this time, disputes in the U.S. over slavery and South Carolina's nullification of federal taxes were prevalent. Joseph Smith's history states that appearances of troubles among the nations were becoming more visible to the prophet than they had previously been since the church began her journey out of the wilderness. The church does not exist in a vacuum. Neither do any of the revelations or teachings exist in a vacuum. They come through a vessel. But yet we listen. This picture is a depiction of Elijah Abel, who is known as one of the earliest Black Latter-day Saints, baptized in 1832. You see all the information here on the screen. Married to Mary Ann Adams in March of 1836, he was ordained to the Latter-day Saint priesthood as an elder in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And from the evidence, folks believe that he was ordained by Joseph Smith. Different scholars give different information. In December of 1836, he's ordained a 70, becomes a duly licensed minister of the gospel for missionary work in Ohio. Served missions in New York, served a mission in Canada. Elijah Abel served approximately four missions. The fourth mission, he came home where he passed away. His ordinations are documented. His paperwork lives in Salt Lake City. In 1839, he's a member of the 70s Quorum in Nauvoo, works as a mortician at the request of Joseph Smith. 1843, he served another mission for the church. 1847, he arrived in Utah. 1853, he asks to enter the temple and is denied by Brigham Young. 1883, he is still on church records as a 70. 1884, he goes on another mission. He returned home and died December 25th, 1884. What happened to his priesthood? November 27th, 1900, Enoch Abel, his son, was ordained an elder. Enoch's son Elijah was ordained a priest July 5th, 1934. Ordained an elder September 29th, 1935. Priesthood lives on beyond its holders, even when the practice of continuing to ordain Black men stopped. This is a photograph of Jane Elizabeth Manning James, born into a free Black family in Connecticut, 1822. She and her family walked over 700 miles to join the Saints in Nauvoo. The story of her pioneer service and her pioneer walk, waiting and trying to evade and be safe during the time where it wasn't safe to be a Black person walking because you could be assumed to be an escaped enslaved person and returned to any plantation of someone's choosing. So as Jane walked with her family, they did so in the same ways that so many saints walked and ran to freedom going north. But Jane and her family came west, joined the church in 1841 and was active in the faith until her death in 1908, preached nothing but repentance to this people. I want you to pay attention to the fact that Jane and Elijah worked to do the work of their ancestors. She was baptized for her ancestors in the Salt Lake Temple after its dedication. She had 10 children, raised and helped her neighbors through difficult times and shared her testimony of the gospel. Jane petitioned Brigham Young many times to be able to have access to the temple for her own endowments, for her own salvation. When recognizing that that was not going to happen in 1900, she dictated her life story and asked that it be read at her funeral. One of the works of surviving white supremacy is making sure that your story lives and is passed on to those who will need to hear it. So despite the system being set up in the US of chattel slavery, demanding a call for repentance in all missionary work, Black members stepped forth, and were able to survive and navigate white supremacy. Our discussions on enslavement continued. This is from Brigham Young as he stayed on the floor of the legislative session in 1852, February 1852. And I'm just going to read to you what he said. I've made it brief just because the words are difficult not to say, but to feel. They're difficult to read. They're difficult to have to see this person in these two different roles as a man of his time, that we like to say, when at the same time, there were other members who said this is not how we need to be. But I want you to understand the ways white supremacy functions and that it makes its own rules and it takes common stories and fits them to a purpose. So Brigham Young says, my remarks in the first place will be upon the cause of the introduction of slavery. Long ago, Mama Eve, our good old Mother Eve, partook of the forbidden fruit, and this made a slave of her. Adam hated very much to have her taken out of the Garden of Eden. And now our old daddy says, I believe I will eat of the fruit and become a slave too. Now I can tell you, I've read Genesis a couple times because I always start at the beginning of the Bible and I don't really get that far, right? But I'm reading Genesis and I'm like, I don't remember that part. But you know, prophet, person, okay, maybe that's kind of how it's happening. But understand how systems work. They try to maintain balance. And so when he is going to argue to make Utah a slave territory, he has to start with something that he feels is beyond argument. And so he starts in Genesis. He continues to say, this was the first introduction of slavery upon this earth, and there has been not a son or daughter of Adam from that day to this, but what were slaves in the true sense of the word. So the true sense of the word is what happened to Adam and Eve. This stuff you all are talking about, this is all secondary. That slavery will continue, Brigham Young says, until there is a people raised up upon the face of the earth who will contend for righteous principles, who will not only believe in, but operate with every power and faculty given to them to help to establish the kingdom of God, to overcome the devil and drive him from the earth. Then will this curse be removed. This was the starting point of slavery. So Brigham Young makes his case. Others speak out against it, but Brigham Young says the following. Therefore, I will not consent for one moment to have an African dictate me or any brethren with regard to church or state government. I may vary in my views from others, and they may think I am foolish in the things that I've spoken and think that they know more than I do, but I know more than they do. If the Africans cannot bear rule in the Church of God, what business have they to bear rule in the state and government affairs of this territory or any others? And still, we lead. We find ways. We are patient. We are persistent. And we are promoted. You're seeing just some of Black leadership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the last 2 years. President Corbett in the Young Men's General Presidency, Elder Johnson, the General Authority 70, Tracy Browning on the Relief Society General Board, Carol Costley on the Young Women's General Board. We find ways to lead in and outside of these structures. So how did we get here? I'm going to walk you through 3 separate models. You will probably not remember any of them, but I want you to understand how they make us make sense of the experience of an identity in a faith. I'm going to walk you through minority identity development. It's a reflective process of minority identity. You might be saying, well, what do you mean, LaShawn? How is the Mormon church going to have a minority identity experience? If you look at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a minority religious institution, you will understand how they have grown and moved through the minority identity development process. I'm going to take you through 5 reflective processes, 5 stages: conformity, dissonance and appreciation, resistance and immersion, introspection and integrative awareness, from beginning to end, right? And then at that point, I argue and suggest that instead of maintaining ourselves and our minority identity, something about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints chose whiteness. And I'm going to walk you through the white identity development process of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, encompassing 2 different phases. One phase being the abandonment of racism, the other phase being defining a non-racist identity. And I'm going to talk to you about the organizational church and what organizational change can look like as a continuum of change efforts. I'm going to walk you through 5 simple words from Webster's dictionary to disparage, deny, acknowledge, affirm, and promote. And as I walk you through these 3 identity models and these 3 models for change, I want you thinking about why and how whiteness, white supremacy, and Black Lives Matter start needing to be more thoroughly and explicitly connected. So let's walk through the stages of minority development. This comes from Atkinson, Morton, and Sue back in 1998. It's applied to most ethnic minority groups, and this is a 5-stage reflective process. Now, the thing about identity development stages is that they are, they're not linear and they are fluid. So you can go into one, but you move from one stage to the next because of an experience. We call them fulcrum points, or like a flash point. Something happens that makes you question where you were and moves you into the next phase. So if you're familiar with some elements of Mormon history or the Latter-day Saint faith here in the US, you will be able to notice and identify, oh, that's how we moved from this stage to this one. Oh, that's how we got from this one to this one. That's how we're here. You have to think about the things and the events that happened that moved the church from one stage into the next in order to understand where our involvement and our alignment with white supremacy has happened. So stage one is called conformity. And if you see, there's 4 different sections. So when we're looking at stage one, conformity, if the Latter-day Saint faith is a minority religious institution, what does it mean to conform? What is the attitude towards self that the Latter-day Saint faith had for itself in the early 1830s? Self-depreciating or neutral due to a low race or identity salience. Now, if you read the works of Paul Reeve or Russell Stevenson and other white male historians who have talked about the growth and the progress of the church, you'll understand that the creation of the Mormon faith was met with so much resistance because it was an expansive idea of community and Zion. And so as it looked at itself, it said, okay, there's this idea, I'm not as good, I don't have as much value because I'm not as powerful, I'm not as valued as the other Christian denominations. So then the attitude towards others of the same minority, who did the LDS faith have to compare itself to as a religious minority within Christianity? Maybe the Quakers, but outside of Christianity, maybe Jewish faiths or Muslim faiths. Looking at itself and saying, who else is like me that's on the outside? Maybe we're all not as good. Maybe we all should just kind of keep our heads down and not do a whole lot. Group depreciating or neutral due to a low identity salience. It hasn't really grown or stepped into itself. So now attitudes towards others of a different minority also fits in this category. So for Latter-day Saints looking around to try and say, who is like me? Who's surviving? Who's thriving? Who's powerful? Who's able to do this? Who's able to gather the saints? You're looking at folks that are similar to you, other minority Christian faith denominations, and others who are different from you because they're other religious minorities. And you're trying to figure out, do I align with you or do I separate myself from you? In the beginning of the faith, they chose alignment. The attitude towards the dominant group, which was dominant Protestant Christianity or Catholicism, said, I want to be like them. I want to be as powerful. I want to be as valued. I want to be as safe and secure as they are to operate in the United States. Moves us into step 2 and stage 2 of the process for the faith, dissonance and appreciating. Something happens. Now, in the Christian foundation for the Latter-day Saint faith, there is now this conflict between, I really don't feel like I'm getting this right. I don't feel like I'm actually making sense of it. They're better than I am. But then there's also something where it's like, actually, no, I am getting it because I'm inclusive, I'm expansive. We have this Black man who's been ordained, who's now going to go and serve a mission. We are actually moving him through the process as we would all of our brothers that are eligible and ready to serve. So the attitude towards self is now a little conflicted. Am I doing the right thing or am I not doing the right thing? Am I fitting in or am I not fitting in? What's the attitude towards others of the same minority? What are the Catholics doing? What are the Quakers doing? They're also Christian. What are they doing? So are they doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? So they have this conflict between, yes, I'm doing what my tenets of my faith say that I should do, but I'm not really getting a whole lot of feedback that's positive, that's really affirming to me that I'm heading in the right direction. Same thing between this conflict between dominantly held views of minority hierarchy and feelings of shared experience. What that means in the faith sense is, on the list of who is better outside of the dominant faith, where do I fit? How high up are the Mormons compared to the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and the other denominations of Christianity that are not mainstream? Where are we at in the pecking order, right? And then what's the attitude towards the dominant group? Well, I see how we're being treated from the dominant Protestant Christian organizations and Christian faiths in the country. I want to still be like them, but I definitely don't like how we're being treated. So you have this dissonance that's happening for the faith in its early ages and the appreciation of what it's supposed to mean to be Christian. So you're having this dissonance. This is an active process. And then when you move into resistance and immersion, something happens where you get very confident and kind of full of yourself. And you say, you know what? No, I'm right, they're wrong. Self-appreciating. When the Latter-day Saints said, you know what, we're going to recruit Africans, we're going to bring in Asian populations, we're going to recruit to the indigenous, because these are all God's children. All are alike unto God. And we are going to do this work to bring forward God's family and to pull them all in together under one roof, because that is our worldwide responsibility. So we are group appreciating because that's what we do. We're Mormons and we like everybody and everything is going to be good because that's who we say that we are. That is the work that the Lord has called us to do. We appreciate ourselves. We appreciate our work. Attitude towards others of a different minority, feelings of conflict, because I feel bad for them that maybe they're not doing what we're doing, but I can't really be worried about them because that's competition for me. I just want to do what the right thing is for my group. And my attitude towards the dominant group, the dominant Christian faith, is I don't like them because they are actually being exclusive. They are not recruiting the Baptists and the Methodists. They don't let Black people sit in their same congregations. And so now the African Methodist Episcopalian churches, Black churches, are being formed because they're not being included in mainstream Christianity. So you see this element of resistance because I don't want to do what the dominating group is doing, and immersion. I just want to have my own little bubble. I'm going to be in the world, but not of the world. I am going to do what I'm called, which is the Lord's work. Introspection. Has the church gotten here as a minority faith experience? Introspection. Now, if I'm only going to focus on myself and say that I'm better than everything else because this is where I feel safe psychologically, this is how I feel safe physically, this is where I'm going to stand and stand comfortably. But when I have this attitude of toward myself, what's my basis of my self-appreciation? If I am trying to go and be inclusive at the expense of excluding mainstream Christianity that does not accept me, is that really what I should be doing? Should I be unequivocally appreciating myself as a member of my faith? Well, I guess I'll think about it. Now I think about how I'm interacting with others and how am I creating Zion and creating this community. You see what the church did when they were in Nauvoo, when they were in Kirtland. And still, despite these moves, right, having to move and having to go to different places, being pushed out of Missouri became a time where the church said, we are no longer safe psychologically to do the things that we believe we're called to do. We're no longer safe physically. And if we have to make a choice, we have to make a change. So we went from these places of being able to see ourselves, value ourselves, introspecting and saying, okay, who do we really want to be? Is it right for us to be at odds with mainstream Christianity, that concern with the basis of group depreciation? What is it going to call out of us? That fifth stage of integrative awareness, in most discussions of Latter-day Saint history, there is this choice point where we're able to self-appreciate. We value ourselves as a faith, as a minority faith within Christianity here in the US. Attitude towards others of the same minority, other minority Christian denominations, we appreciate them as well. Attitude towards others of a different minority, non-Christian or other world religions that are not Christian, but we appreciate them as well. Attitude towards the dominant group, which is mainstream Christianity, because we're not that. We are a minority, another denomination of Christianity that does not have that much power. We have a selective appreciation. We appreciate good behavior, don't appreciate negative behavior. The church has not gotten here yet, but this is where it is trying to be by changing the name, by stating, call us by Church of Jesus Christ, by letting people know that Christ is the center of what we do and the center of how we worship. We're trying to get to integrative awareness, but because our safety was threatened, psychologically, our safety was threatened about who and how we identified, we chose safety. And my suggestion to you is that as we worked through this experience of minority identity development, we chose what was going to keep the church safe. Now, many arguments are, well, do you think that if this is what God wanted, God would want a small group of racist and not a large group of inclusive people? We have to actually wrestle with that and say, do you think that we had to choose to be racist because that's what we said God wanted us to do? Or did we choose to uphold white supremacy because that's what kept us safe and allowed us to blend in? This brings us to the whiteness of Mormonism. Because when we made a choice to be safe as an institutional faith, safety is associated with aligning with whiteness, and whiteness in the 1800s and 1900s has been rooted in white supremacy. So when you look at Paul Reeves' book, Religion of a Different Color, Race and the Mormon Struggle for Whiteness, one of the things that he's quoted as saying, so successful were they at claiming whiteness for themselves that by the time Mormon Mitt Romney sought the White House in 2012, he was labeled the whitest white man to run for office in recent memory. Mormons once again found themselves on the wrong side of white. I encourage you, if you haven't, I think you all have, you've heard from Dr. Reeve, to read his book and to understand what was this struggle for whiteness? What was the safety that came in whiteness? What was the promise that came from aligning with whiteness and adapting white supremacy in ways that allowed the church to be safe? The question becomes, where are we in our whiteness? This then moves us into our second identity development model. So when you're looking at stages of change, now as a clinician, I almost did stages of change out of addiction to talk with you about the addiction and the addictive nature of white supremacy. There's a quote that says, white supremacy is a hell of a drug, but word of wisdom, that kind of stuff, let me not do that. So I stuck with white identity development models. And this is the two phases, one of abandoning racism and the second of defining a non-racist identity. And as you think about the Latter-day Saint Church as a white institution with a white identity, what phase or what stage do you see us in? Lots of text. I'm going to highlight a few pieces for you so you can understand each stage. In the contact stage, this is your basic, I'm oblivious. I don't really know that it exists. I don't really understand racism. I don't even see people. I don't even see color. I just see people. Minimal experiences with people of color, may profess to be colorblind. There's a societal influence in perpetuating stereotypes and the superior or inferior dichotomy associated between Blacks and whites. Those things are not noticed, but they are accepted unconsciously or consciously without any critical thought or analysis. Now, when you look at the minority faith of the Latter-day Saint Church, you're thinking about what is it choosing to do to survive? What is the societal influence that's impacting the Latter-day Saint Church? What's happening that they are perpetuating stereotypes and a superior inferior dichotomy? What you're seeing is a faith that is choosing to disappear and to try and be invisible and not be noticed. So if we don't say anything, they won't harm us. Racial and cultural differences are then considered unimportant. And these individuals seldom perceive themselves as dominant group members or having any biases or prejudices. This is what happens when we hear people say, no, all are alike unto God. God is no respecter of persons. The church is not racist because all are alike unto God. It's a dismissive statement rooted in self-preservation. How do we go from stage 1 to stage 2? In stage 2, disintegration. In this stage, the person becomes conflicted over unresolvable racial moral dilemmas that are frequently perceived as polar opposites. Whenever a prominent Latter-day Saint is asked for their opinion on freedom of religion, you will always hear that minority religious experience come up. I believe everyone has access to freedom of religion. I believe people should be able to worship where they want to worship. The Latter-day Saints know how to draw that line and to speak up for religious freedom in worship and religious freedom in difference of beliefs. The Latter-day Saint faith will be the first ones to stand up for the religious freedoms and worship experiences for Muslims, for Sikhs, for Jewish faiths, and for other communities that are seeking safety and sanctuary in their places of worship. So what you have now in this stage of change are these polar opposites, this dissonance, this disintegration, which is, I believe that I am non-racist, but I don't want my child to marry someone that is not of my race. I believe that all men are created equal and all are like unto God, yet I'm okay with seeing society treat Black people as second-class citizens. I don't acknowledge that oppression exists, but I actively witness it. Now, mind you, this model comes from 1995. Not acknowledging that oppression exists while witnessing it, a la the beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles. What could I replace that beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles with? The year of 2020. So the person, the institution of faith, becomes increasingly conscious of his or her whiteness, may experience dissonance and conflict between choosing between own group loyalty and humanism, getting back to the roots of the church when it began early on in its years as a faith that was inclusive and committed to creating the community of Zion. Stage 3, reintegration. So now when it gets too much and I don't feel safe and I'm trying to think too much outside and I'm trying to say, oh my gosh, no, I think I'm supposed to be out. I'm supposed to not be racist. I'm supposed to be inviting everyone that does not feel safe. So it's safer for me to back up and to be in white supremacy. Because of the tremendous influence that societal ideology exerts, the initial resolution of that dissonance often moves in the direction of the dominant ideology. Let me go and align with what's going to keep me safe, which is white supremacy, though it is not named in that sense. I'm going to go along with mainstream Christianity. It's associated with race and one's own socio-racial group identity. And for the Latter-day Saint faith, that was whiteness. This stage might be characterized as a regression, for the tendency is to idealize one's own group and to be intolerant of other minority groups. And the Latter-day Saint faith always struggles here because they know we are an insider with whiteness, but an outsider in Christianity. In any moment, we can become the same group of downtrodden, exterminated or extermination order deserving, pushed out of Missouri saints who had to trudge across the plains, lose family, lose friends, and have zero time to grieve because we were trying to survive. And we established ourselves in Utah and then recreated the same kinds of systems that now others have to survive because of us. So there's a firmer and more conscious belief in white racial superiority, and racial and ethnic minorities are blamed for their own problems. The racial identity of a United States American faith could be in this reintegration phase. I think especially as we look at the last 4 years and the politics of high profile Latter-day Saints, and not even the last 4 years, give me the last 8 weeks from January 6th unto now. Stage 4 is pseudo-independence. Again, something has to happen. Maybe it's January 6th, 2021. A person's likely to move into this phase due to a painful or insightful encounter or event which jars the person from reintegration. They realize, I don't want to be aligned with white supremacist mainstream Christianity. I want to be something different. So they begin to attempt an understanding of racial, cultural, and sexual orientation differences, and they might reach out and begin to interact with minority group members. The choice of minority individuals, however, is based on how similar they are to me. So I'm going to embrace you if I feel like you're just like me, but just your skin color is different. So what I essentially want is a safe, whitewashed version of you so that I can make you feel safe being with me. But really, my safety is still the most important. An attempt to understand has not reached the experiential and affective domains of the identity of this person in their whiteness. In other words, understanding Euro-American white privilege, the socio-political aspects of race, and issues of bias, prejudice, and discrimination tend to be more intellectual exercises. So we go to a workshop, we go to a seminar, we read a book, we talk about all these things, and we say, but this is what we're doing because all are alike unto God, and God is no respecter of persons. It's an intellectual, not a practical exercise. It's one of the things that I've often spoken where I have an issue with my other scholars within religious faith, within this one particularly, is the idea of studying and discussing racism without having to survive it. It's a very different experience coming from me as a Black woman who is in this faith versus coming from a white male or white female who is studying racism and race in this faith. If you haven't had to survive it and you aren't necessarily completely aware of it, it's going to be a very different conversation when you are discussing it. Our fifth stage is immersion and immersion. If the person has been now reinforced to continue a personal exploration of himself or herself as a racial being, now the question is, what does it mean to be white? Janet Helm states that the person searches for an understanding of the personal meaning of racism and the ways by which one benefits from white privilege. There's an increasing willingness to truly confront one's own biases, to redefine one's own whiteness, and to become more activistic in directly combating racism and oppression. This stage is marked with increasing experiential and effective understanding that were lacking in previous states. This is where you see President Nelson asking the church to lead out in abandoning prejudice, to lead out in rooting out racism. This is where you see Dallin H. Oaks saying Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is an eternal truth, and all reasonable people should be able to accept that. You see these words, these intellectual exercises, but what you have to ask is, what are the actions at this point? The sixth stage of white identity development is an increasing awareness of one's own whiteness and a reduced feeling of guilt around it. It's an acceptance of one's own role in perpetuating racism with a renewed determination to abandon white entitlement that leads to your ability to stand firm and to stand autonomous. The person, the institution, the faith is knowledgeable about racial, ethnic, and cultural differences. They value diversity, and they're no longer fearful, intimidated, or uncomfortable with the experiential reality of race. Barunda says the development of a non-racist white identity becomes increasingly stronger. Now, this is model 2 of 3 that I wanted to cover with you. But I want to speak with you now about the solidarity for Black Lives Matter and the organizational efforts for change. Very briefly, because whenever I talk about race, I can hear mostly my mom in my head being like, well, you just don't like white people and you just can't let these young white men do their work. And how come you just can't be nice? So I put the white men on my frame and on my slide because I actually do really appreciate their work. I think Russell Stevenson, Dr. Reeve have done fantastic jobs putting together the history of Blackness and whiteness within this faith. But our question becomes, how do we go from where we are to where we have covenanted as a people of faith to be? Very quickly, as my time comes to an end, I want to engage you with the efforts that this organization must make in order to explore where we actually are. In 2000, Dr. Yvonne Hedgepeth created a document for safe schools, for the Healthy and Safe Schools Coalition, and she talked about what does it mean to affirm versus promote as we do this work of diversity and of change. And she picked these 5 definitions from the Webster's Dictionary, 1996, and she talked about how we have a historical connection with each word, and that we have to understand that where we are is always going to be relative to where we want to be. So if you think about it very briefly, can you say within the history of the United States and the history of the Latter-day Saint faith that we have had times where we have disparaged groups of people in service of white supremacy, to belittle, demean, ridicule, or discredit? Yes, probably yes, right? Can we say in the history of the United States, the history of the faith, where it comes to white supremacy, have we ever denied groups of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, from access to the benefits and the ordinances of the faith? Yes, to refuse to recognize or to acknowledge. Would you say that at this point, the Latter-day Saint faith currently acknowledges the presence, the experience, the contributions, the validity, the value of BIPOC individuals? And it looks like it wants to abandon white supremacy, to admit, to be real or true, to recognize the existence of Black and brown folks in the church, to recognize the existence of LGBTQ communities in the church, to recognize the existence of women in the church. So many questions, conversations, and activity movements that we've seen around these 3 different groups. Now, the question becomes, what does the church do to affirm these communities as part of the body of Christ, as it were? To state or assert positively about a group, to affirm them, or to promote them, to further advance or exalt, to put in a higher position than any other group. Now, where Dr. Hedgepeth and I disagree is that Dr. Hedgepeth says if you promote, you're doing basically the same thing as somebody who disparages, because you are furthering, advancing, or exalting, putting in a higher position than another group, this group. I tend to disagree because of these next 2 slides. So what Dr. Hedgepeth says is that because individual attitudes and practices are slow to change, pay attention, the organizational climate typically lags at least 1 step behind official policy. So for example, if the policy is to acknowledge, most folks will choose to deny. If the policy is to affirm, most folks will choose to acknowledge. If our goal is affirmation, then we must be people who promote, is my suggestion and belief. So what she says is, remember, promoting diversity is not the same as promoting a thing or a group, or promoting a group. To spend public resources to promote diversity, i.e. respect for all, is reasonable and productive organizational goal, and it does not equate with promoting any particular group. Now, There are two things that I want to do before I wrap up. I don't think I have time for one, but it might come up in the question and answer. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hold my breath. What I want you to understand is the work of the Black LDS Legacy Conference is to promote the value of Black history in the Latter-day Saint faith, because the belief is if I promote it and individual attitudes lag one step behind, then I know that my membership will affirm it. If I affirm the inclusion, the value, the dignity, and the worth of Black history and Latter-day Saint faith, then I know that my individuals and attitudes inside the church will acknowledge. If I only acknowledge the history, the value, the dignity, the worth, and the importance of Black history in the Latter-day Saint faith, I know that individuals and attitudes in the church will deny. Now, as you think about organizational change efforts and you think about where the church has gone and where it's going to want to be, we must find ourselves, in my opinion, promoting, at the very least, affirming. So this young man is someone that I am deeply connected to, taught him how to walk with 2 Ritz crackers. It's like the major accomplishment of my life. I want to say that I also taught him how to read, because I'm going to read to you some of his words, probably in the Q&A, that allow you to really understand what the responsibility is of the Latter-day Saint Church to align itself with a solidarity movement such as Black Lives Matter. Once you promote, individual attitudes and ideas will affirm. I'm going to leave you with the words for my review of Dr. Brooks's book, which I always have to tip my hat to say she is the first, if not the only, white Mormon scholar to really throw her hat in the ring at this nature to talk about white supremacy and the Latter-day Saint faith. I say that Brooks offers recommendations for the institutional church itself to change from the top by using suggestions from Black people at the margins. This is what you're seeing when Dallin H. Oaks says at BYU, Black Lives Matter. But this is a burdensome work on marginalized people, though it is well-intentioned. It clearly values the suggestions that Black people and that other marginalized groups within the church are saying. However, the institutional church is not the only organization or group that needs to change. I say that Dr. Brooks acknowledges that in order for liberal Mormon organizations to confront racism in the church, that they have to see their investment in white identity politics as corrosive to the tradition. So when you look at the organizational church and its investment and its connection with white supremacy as a tool of its own survival, how has the work looked to extricate that survival work from the progression work that liberal and progressive groups within the church are trying to do against whiteness and white supremacy and the patriarchy that upholds it? A clear call to action, my words, requires a reckoning. My ask and my suggestion is that white privileged and white proximal groups that actively benefit from Mormon white supremacy, the Mormon white supremacy version of simply not being Black. And because they benefit from simply not being Black, they must as such stop comparing their present day experiences of oppression to pre-1978 priesthood and temple practices denial. Oftentimes I will hear in liberal groups, liberal white groups, that this is just like how they treated the Black people when they couldn't get the priesthood, as if our treatment has ended because we have access to the priesthood. Were it so, this picture in front of you would not be necessary. So I contend that it perpetuates a white racial innocence and prohibits these white progressive liberal groups within the church from seeing their active racism against Black communities within the church's white feminist and white LGBTQIA+ movements. This is a conversation that has to happen. The change that needs to happen within the church as it relates to its white supremacy and its inability or its emerging movements to align in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. The change must come from the top, but I contend that it especially must come from the middle, because the middle is what works hardest to stay higher than the bottom and away from the margins. I appreciate Dr. Brooks's work in Mormonism and white supremacy for its continued talking points that it's going to give to all of you as its readers. I want you to knowingly engage in critical race consciousness raising around whiteness and white supremacy and the identity development process that has led us and contributed to who and how we are as an organization today. Even though it's a byproduct of the book's shortcomings more than by design of the book necessarily, I want those with eyes to see and ears to hear who do justice and love mercy to join in this work put their shoulders to the wheel and abandon these attitudes, dismantle white supremacy, and truly move the work of the church forward. That is the end of my remarks. At this point, I am so excited to engage with y'all in question and answer. Let's get to it.
Well, thank you, Professor Williams, for a really fantastic, evocative, comprehensive, and fascinating presentation. I too am excited to get to the Q&A. A quick reminder for those of you watching from afar that if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat window on YouTube. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get going with some of the students from our reading group. And I'm going to call first on Artie Diaz, who has a question that I think speaks quite precisely to some of what you were saying just in the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for your time today and kind of just talking us through some very real practical applications of theory to really move this work along. I think that my question for you kind of speaks to, this work that you're doing is so important, and anti-racism work within the LDS Church in particular is taxing, given that, the really personal nature of, resistance, and often, this work falling to marginalized communities to kind of bridge the gulf between words and action. So my question to you is, what practices is it that sustains you in this work, whether it be theories or coalitions or what relationships you carry with you, but what is it that gives you the energy and the passion to continue this work, even when it can be difficult?
I think that this is really where my brother's words come into play, and I want to read to you just a few of them. The work of Black scholars within this faith, whether it's James Jones or Reverend Dr. Fatima Saleh, who have used the words of Scripture as the indicting conversation that we all need to be having. These are the words that really stand out to me. And I want to share just a few of them that my brother shared this weekend at the Black Latter-day Saint Legacy Conference. He talks about the following, and he says, he uses a scene from Black Panther where King T'Challa goes to the ancestral plane and then really engages and holds his ancestors to account for leaving a child behind to fend for himself when they could have helped him out. And James says, T'Challa at once gained a testimony of some eternal principles that I want to talk about. The first one is that it is a sin to do nothing when doing good is an option. And it's these words that I really find comfort in, because they do all the speaking for me, my words. Back to his. He quotes Scripture and he says, as it's written in Leviticus 19, do not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. He says, Christ teaches this again when he gives us the parable of the Good Samaritan, when he identifies the Samaritan as the one who acted as a neighbor. In the Epistle of James, we read, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And then in the Book of Mormon, we have a whole chapter, a whole angry letter about this very thing. We see a lot of echoes of T'Challa and Captain Moroni as he rebukes Pahoran for inaction on behalf of their country and people. James says, I'm well aware that Pahoran wasn't totally to blame here, but Moroni's point still stands that inaction in the face of injustice is not okay. Listen to what he says and hear the voices of Black Americans in his words, because this is incriminating. This is Alma chapter 60, starting in verse 5. And he reads, but behold, great has been the slaughter among our people. Yea, 1,000 have fallen, while it might have otherwise been if ye had rendered sufficient strength and succor for them. Yea, great has been your neglect towards us. That was just verse 5. A lament of lives lost because those in power did nothing to help. Does this sound familiar? He asks. Verse 7, can you sit to think upon your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor while your enemies are spreading the work of death around you? Yea, while they are murdering thousands of your brethren. Again, Moroni is condemning not just the inaction, but the apathy of people in power. As Moroni's countrymen die, thousands of them. Does that sound familiar? James asks. And now, my beloved brethren, for ye ought to be beloved. Yea, and ye ought to have stirred yourselves more diligently for the welfare and the freedom of this people. But behold, ye have neglected them, insomuch that the blood of thousands shall come upon your heads for vengeance. Yea, for known unto God were all their cries and their sufferings. James says those with power or means will need to reckon with the neglect and the death of our people. Again, it is a sin to have the means to save lives, the means to stop killing people and refuse to do so. Where else do we see this? He asks. Verses 11 and 21. Behold, could you suppose that you could sit upon your thrones, and because of the exceeding goodness of God, ye could do nothing, and he would deliver you? Behold, if ye had supposed this, ye would have supposed in vain. Or do you suppose that the Lord will still deliver us while we sit upon our thrones and do not make use of the means which the Lord has provided for us? James says, I don't know that it was made any more plain than with Dieter F. Uchtdorf's talk, You Are My Hands. But let me tell y'all how exhausting it is to hear people preach platitudes about racism being evil and all being alike unto God, only to engage in no intentional and protracted efforts to make this a reality. Rooting out racism is no doubt a big job that we're going to need God's help with, but we can only fast, pray, and preach so much before we have to commit to some real action. And so it's words like these that sustain me, because it's the same book, the same scripture, the same people, that if we truly were to engage the words around equality, fairness, justice, and protection that we have for our brothers and sisters, that is how we're able to do the work.
Can I actually interject a question here? Just this is a reading, obviously, I've never heard of this particular interaction. And I am interested in the fact that he said, of course, we know that Pahoran wasn't entirely to blame, but with the context you just provided, part of me is feeling like Pahoran gave some of those platitudes to get himself off, I don't know, of the hook, line, and sinker. Because if anyone is not familiar, Pahoran then says, what you don't know is I've been people came and took me and they bound me, but I'm really glad that you, Moroni, are still so passionate about the work. And I wish I was more able to help, but unfortunately my hands are, in his case, literally tied. And so what I'm wondering is, do you think that based on that context you've just provided and your brother provided, that there is some type of, maybe, I mean, as it's coined in like the Twitter world, like progmo or progressive Mormon or white liberal rhetoric that could be applied in Pahoran's sidestepping of accountability?
Yeah. Like, it's what we see, right? This is what makes the work of solidarity so difficult, because, well, I mean, what do you mean I have to not be racist? Like, I am a white female and I don't have the priesthood. And so I'm also being damaged by white supremacy. Absolutely, sis. But like, it's still going to protect you before it protects me. So let's have that conversation. I think that's one of the things that I run into so much within white liberalism inside of the church. It's like, they can understand racism and they can understand how Black people were treated. That's not what bothers them. What bothers them is when they are treated the way Black people are treated. And so then they say, but we're going through this right now. And what do you mean I have to fight racism as well? Multitask. Absolutely. And the thing about it too, is that there's that self-blaming piece that also comes in it. Verse 12, James quotes and he says, do you suppose that because so many of your brethren have been killed, it's because of their wickedness? I say unto you, if you have supposed this, ye have supposed it in vain. For I say unto you, there are many who have fallen by the sword, and behold, it is to your condemnation. So James says, because we in Western societies are so socialized to believe that the inferiority of Black people, there's a temptation to believe that when we see Black people suffering poverty, suffering police brutality, other types of violence and racism, that they must have brought it on themselves. And we separate ourselves from being part and parcel of the oppression that Blackness and Black people are experiencing. And then we all run under the umbrella because we know Black folk have been surviving it for so long. They'll know what to do and they can tell us what to do. And so then it gets recommended that, well, then we should follow what they're doing, because this thing that's happening to us now, they've been surviving it. Remember that beginning, middle, and end. They're still in the middle. And all we're trying to do in progressive white Mormon land at times is we want to get to the end as quickly as possible. If that means you're still stuck in the middle, well, then, I mean, hey, at least one of us is better off now, right? And isn't that worth celebrating? Because otherwise my hands feel like they're tied and I can't really do this work. So it's all happening at the same time. And that's why I say the change has to really come from the middle, because the middle is working so hard not to be at the bottom and not to be at the margins. And that middle is what actually needs to do the work to go and rise to the top. Wanting change to come up from the top, it actually should come from the middle, because you're the one that has the most to lose. Whether it's Mormonism within Christianity, or whether it's white liberal progressives and other marginalized non-Black groups within the faith, You've got the most to lose, but they don't see any value in aligning with the bottom and working from the bottom up, recognizing that if you're able to create an end for the oppression of Black people and Black saints, then everybody else that benefits from that oppression also benefits from the liberation. So why not jump in and actually do that work? That's the question that I think remains unanswered.
Thank you so much for that remark, that response. And I have to say, maybe it's just the English professor in me, but your attention to the sort of narrative structure of oppression, not only in the development of the various forms of identity that you walk through, but in terms of this beginning, middle, and end, I think really clarifies in a very human and approachable way the difference at the levels of experience and acknowledgement that you're really targeting here. And so I think maybe Brody's got a question that could speak directly to this, because Professor Williams, you've done a great deal to show us what work has been done, continues to be done, the gains that have been made, and the work that needs to continue. But as we are, all of us, still very much trapped in the middle, I think Brody has a question about how to get unstuck.
Well, I guess my question, very simply put, was I'm wondering how exactly do we define the middle and those parameters, given how convoluted authority actually operates within the church? The fact that we don't have authority that's trained per se, it's that bishops and stake leaders operate as lay people within the church. So defining what the top, middle, and bottom is structurally, I think, very difficult in the church. So I'm wondering, what does the middle look like to you? What kind of discourse, especially also given the fact that, from what I understand, Mormon discourse centers so much around American Mormon discourse that it's very much like liberal conservative Mormons, and we use a lot of language that's very particular to that region. But Mormonism is a global church, and for the most part, it's actually more out of the U.S. than in it. So I'm wondering again, like, how do we structure the middle, and how do we make that kind of the hotspot for anti-racist work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think the middle it's relative, right? When people say they want to see change from the top, they're talking about the quorum, the Q15, right? They want to see change come from there. Now, the way that the church works is so top down that you can get away with a lot of things, like having a Black LDS history conference, 4 years in a row before anybody comes and tries to tell you that you can't do it, because we're not on the radar. Or if we are, we've got some people that are blocking for us to help us continue to do this work. So the middle becomes, your bishops and your stake presidents. And the fact that it's bishops and stake presidents in DC that helped us to do this conference, and it's bishops and stake presidents in Idaho that may or may not be holding disciplinary councils for their members who were in DC at the Capitol riots. Like, I don't know who the guy, Captain Moroni with the flag, like, it took everything in me not to put his video and his picture in my presentation. But I was like, LaShawn, just focus on what you need to focus on, because I'm wondering, like, where is his bishop? Where is the stake president? Where is the discussion? Let's do a discussion before a disciplinary council. But what do you do with that? And how come it has disappeared? And how come we're not having a conversation about it? I don't know. April is next month. Anything could happen at General Conference, right? But our leadership needs to feel empowered to support their wards and their congregations in doing this work. And they've got to be willing to do it even when Utah gets wind of it and says, hey, what are you doing? Our experiences so far have been that as long as we aren't up in the face of the Q15 and headquarters being really, really loud and obnoxious in ways that we can't support in scripture, folks are like, send your brother's talk to Elder Holland, because he is the next Elder Holland. And I was like, if y'all start the petition, I'll sign it. But like, I'm not going to go and do that, right? And put him out there. But it's this work of trying to figure out, one, do you feel safe enough in the pews to have this conversation? Two, do you feel armed enough with the scriptures that you can make the connections that folks really need to hear? Can you liken the word unto our circumstances? I have been in my ward, and me and my favorite conservative brother in my ward, we're in 3rd or 4th Nephi, and he's sitting behind me. He leans up and he's like, I feel like I hear a lot of the Democratic National Convention in these verses. And I was like, yeah, because that's what Jesus would do. And we have this friendly banter, right, in church, because I know and I believe that there are people who want to do what's right, but they've not been convicted in the word in ways that are moving them into this work because they're still scared about their position. They're still scared that they're going to lose the benefits of white supremacy if they actually speak out and align themselves for justice and solidarity with marginalized populations. There is so much to lose for a church that feels like it fought so hard to be safe, and it's not wrong. But are you willing to lose it all and gain your life in Jesus? That becomes the work. See, listen, y'all, we got 20 minutes. Someone's going to call payroll or HR, like, she needs to go. Like, this is not helpful because now I'm off the cuff. Let me get back to my remarks. Is there another potentially safe question? I like Jesus. I am a child of God, and he wants me for a sunbeam. Can we just like hang out there?
Probably not, unfortunately. We're going to continue down the road that we've already started on, because
Let's go.
this is such a fruitful and important conversation. And as you say, the no church, no institution exists in a vacuum historically or politically. And so raising the political stakes as you have is, I think, an absolutely vital move here. And I was struck in particular about your evocation of Paul Reeves' book. He spoke for this speaker series last fall, and Joanna Brooks, by the way, will be following up in April. And one of the arguments that, what really, it's not a thesis, it's a matter of historical record that he draws out, is that the church, the history of the church really is tied to the invention of white supremacy in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And so when you mentioned that the church chose the path of safety here through a kind of assimilationism or accommodation to the development of white supremacy, it seems to me clear that, you know, the extension of that is that there is safety in domination, so long as that domination can be maintained. And so the fear of the fear of losing that safety is precisely a sort of fear of equality. So, i.e., if I abandon the privileges that I am afforded by white supremacy, then it disintegrates and I lose social power. And this doesn't just play out in the LDS Church; it plays out all over popular discourse, in which questions. It shouldn't be a question that Black Lives Matter, but it's been so thoroughly politicized. And it translates into, I'm not a racist, but I don't think, but somehow if exclusion, if patterns and structures and systems of exclusion are somehow attenuated, then that inclusivity somehow means an increase in exclusion for the dominant group. And so it seems, and this plays out politically and economically in all sorts of other ways. I'm just going off for a moment because I think this leads us to Eric's question, which has to do with how the intersections of certain political sensibilities and religious sensibilities interact in potentially promising and potentially damaging ways. Eric, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And unfortunately, Professor Williams, this is not going to be a safe space Sunday school Sunday question. But let me preface it by saying that I completely agree with your statement that there is a problem of privilege among the Mormon community. That there is a problem. I love the passage that your brother mentioned in Alma chapter 60, where there's a population, a very privileged, a very protected population sitting in stupor, oblivious of the needs to those around them. And so I want to ask you, what do you think is the best way to help Mormons, help members of the church understand their privilege and understand the needs of underprivileged communities around them, especially to conservative members? Because I myself am a conservative, and I'm somebody that disagrees, for example, with the goals, with the proposals of organizations such as Black Lives Matter. I disagree on a political level with the concept of anti-racism. For example, I've read Ibram X. Kendi's book where he states that present discrimination or past discrimination must be corrected by present discrimination, and present discrimination must be corrected by future discrimination. And I think this is an idea that you somewhat mentioned when you're talking about how the church must be proactively promoting certain groups in order to get the society as a whole in a proper balance, in order to get the rest of the pack to follow at an appropriate level. So my question to you, with all this said, is how do we make members of the church aware of their privilege and make them aware of the needs of, for example, the Black community, without politically triggering members that are conservative and who will disagree with policy. Is there a way we can do that without invoking politics?
We're going to make you the spokesperson, Eric, and you're going to have the same experience of being the token conservative LDS member that goes and speaks for all conservatives. And then you will just be the example. So, well, Eric gets it. How come you all can't get it? Same kind of a thing, right? Joking, also very real. Here's what we do. My biggest gripe with our faith community is our convenient minority status. You don't know a Mormon is in the room until they say, but my pioneer ancestors did this, this, and this, and we wear it like a jacket. We put the jacket on when it's convenient to be a minority and it's convenient to be a thing. And then we take the jacket off when it's not. And the thing about it is we are the only faith I can think of that goes and recruits other people to come join with us and be oppressed and be disliked and come into this situation. The thing that we accuse every other marginalized group of doing, which is converting and trying to bring people down, we actually go out and do in the millions every single year. And so my question becomes for our return missionaries, like I served in Africa and I served in Atlanta and in Detroit and in Chicago, and I just loved the people. I fell in love with them. Did you come back and march with them? Did you come back and engage in the work? Did you come back and try and make the community a little bit better and a little bit different? Like, I don't feel like the work is that difficult. I feel like we have to stop patting ourselves on the back for being good Christians. I think we have to honestly understand that if I served in continental Africa or in the Caribbean, then I came back to the US and I have an issue with people marching against police brutality, well, then what do I think how do you think SARS is happening in Nigeria, where they're fighting against police brutality? And we're going to have missionaries that are in Nigeria that are going to say, this is what Black Lives Matter looks like in Nigeria. In England, they were protesting for Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered by the British police in 1992. Their Black Lives Matter movement was a moment where all of these moments of police brutality came to this apex, right? In the summer of 2020. So our question really becomes, are we doing the work of the Lord because it's the work of the Lord, or are we doing it because it's convenient and it makes us feel good about who we are as a people? I am this Mormon, I am this oppressed, and I go out and I do these good things because that's what I do, because I don't want someone saying that I'm privileged. I don't want them to forget that I'm Mormon. I need white Mormons to remember it all the time. I don't want it to be a jacket. I want it to be a tattoo if it wasn't like a word of wisdom thing, right? Like, I want it to be ever present. I want there to be this thing, not just once a year. Like, how come we do Trek? Why do we have kids dress up and get wagons and pretend to be pioneers and everybody got to die, but I can't do Black Lives Matter today? You wouldn't ask me to go and reenact slavery, but we reenact Trek because we want folks to remember what we've been through. We want them to remember this is how hard it was to be Mormon. This is our beginning and our middle. And look at our end. We're here in Utah and we're safe. But how long will we stay safe? That really becomes the question. And I think we are so scared to actually take off that convenient minority religious experience, religious oppression jacket, because if we do, we are forever marked. But we act like there aren't other white groups who have been forever marked, but have done the work of justice anyway. You look at the relationships between Jewish and Black communities across the US, like those have been our people. Those have been folks who have showed up for us and then who have gone and blended into white society and have been like, yeah, I'm gonna go along with it, but I never forget who I am. I never forget my experiences because I know that I am Jewish first before I am white. I need Mormons to remember that they're Mormon first before they're white. I need y'all to navigate. I need y'all to be in those spaces that I can't get into. I can't tell you how many times I will sit and not say anything in a room, but I can tell you who the elders quorum president is, who the bishop is, who the ward secretary is. I know exactly who they are when they walk into me. I can hear it. And they don't expect me to know what they're talking about until I tell them who I am. And I tell them who I am to give myself safety. I talk to my students all the time. You know how it is to code switch. Any missionary in my classroom that has gone outside of Utah had, I served a religious service mission for 2 years in an international way. But in Utah, I served a mission in Colombia. Like, we know how to code switch. So for some reason, we want to act like our safety still isn't at risk because you're Mormon. We have that 2-year gap on our resume that says international humanitarian service when we're looking for jobs outside of Utah. We know what it means to be safe. So if we choose to do the work, it is to choose to be identified every single door you walk through. It is to choose to be Mormon first in whatever way you have to do it, because no one's going to know unless they get to know you. So your work becomes being Mormon when it's inconvenient. not to be safe within our whiteness and our white supremacy at the expense of the lived experiences of others. Like, we really do have to figure that out. I cannot tell you how many people were like, well, he didn't say Black Lives Matter. The L wasn't capitalized, so it wasn't the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was like, are you kidding me? Is this the level of gymnastics that we're going to go through to try and discredit what Elder Oaks is saying? Now, I don't always agree with Elder Oaks. I get in trouble every time I say this, but I'm going to keep saying it because this is what I believe. He is not my top 5. I like 3 people in the quorum of the 15 at a time. He is not one of them. I might like 5. But like, if it comes down to it, do you think I'm not going to take his words and use them to my benefit, as if that has never happened before in this church? To take words and use them to my benefit for the benefit of all people? If the LDS church is able to sit there with the NAACP and say, this is my brother from another mother, but then we're mad about Black Lives Matter. Did you hear what the NAACP said? We are done dying, is what the NAACP said. NAACP, we are fighting against xenophobia, homophobia, racism, and all these other isms. And I'm like, that's not what we showed in the conference talk. But if we're going to be on the stage, then let's be on the stage. Like, it's not difficult to think, what do we have to do? We have to choose to stay in this minority place when it is inconvenient, but to know the benefits of code switching. If the Mormons got together with all the other groups in solidarity in and outside of the US, come on now, we bring in the world his truth, but we're just not ready to do it because we are just so safe. Like, Here are all of these ways that we all know how to be Mormon, and to be Mormon is to be a white heterosexual male. That's not the reality of our membership. And if all are alike unto God, then that means God is diverse and God is inclusive and God is identified and housed in every single body that is precious to the Lord. And so if we're really going to do this work, it's how do I see God in you? And how do I hold myself accountable for being like, well, it's not exactly how I expected it, but this is how they experience it. And how do I let go of all of my stuff that has power over them, that prevents them accessing the gospel as I believe it, so that this person has every single chance to be in front of God and accepted for who they are as they are today, right now. I am not the arbiter of someone else's salvation. I got to work out my own stuff, because if my stuff is getting in the way of their humanity, I'm the problem, not them. So that's a long answer, Eric. Like, that's the work that we all, I think, have to do. Did that kind of answer your question?
I can't tell, Eric, if you're muted because you're wearing a mask. Good for you, by the way.
Sorry, I literally lost my internet connection like right as she addressed me. So like, sorry, last thing I heard was, sorry, that was such a long answer, Eric. And then I didn't hear the last like 2 sentences.
I just asked if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think there is a lot we can do. I love your suggestion of kind of a trek as it relates not just to the pioneer experience, but as relating to different minority, different underprivileged experiences in the US today. I think that would do a lot to raise awareness of the privilege. And then once the members have that awareness, have that compassion, they will be able to understand that we are all minorities, we are all in this together. And there are things I can go do right now to go help.
Yeah, I don't want to do a slavery trek, though. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sign up for that. That's not going to be one that I do. I'm not going to do that. I mean, just stop anyway, but yeah.
Well,
and I don't want white people dressing up in blackface to do a trek for slavery. Don't do that either. Don't do that. Just, we got to find some other way. Do we have to go through it to be able to empathize with it? Like, I don't really want to have to go through awful stuff if I could have just been a decent person and stopped the awful stuff from happening. Like, I don't need to go through a trek. Like, do you have food? Are you okay? Do you need shoes? Like, I can just address the need without me having to also be shoeless. That's the part that I don't really get. Sorry, Nathan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm kind of curious, in light of the answer, a kind of dodge that I've faced when talking about this kind of thing with other Mormons, right, is that there's a lack of interest in doing introspection, as a group. You talk to Mormons and, they're okay with like, okay, yeah, racism, it's a sin. It's a bad thing that people do. I can look at like someone who is like egregiously and obviously just racist, and I can look at that and I can be like, yeah, that's bad. but there's a real difficulty in thinking about, complicity with white supremacy. There's a difficulty in taking the introspection, on a big picture macro scale. You get things like, well, everyone has their agency. It's an individual problem that individuals need to solve by repenting themselves, and there's still no thought about apologizing or repenting for our lapses, as a church, as an institution in the past when it comes to these things. I'm wondering, if you could speak to that a little bit, and how do we communicate and surmount this barrier, that our co-religionists.
Yeah, I think if the Mormon extermination order was like just it get rid of one Mormon, just one individual Mormon, then we could probably have a conversation, but like it got rid of a whole group. So for us to like pick a group experience when it benefits us and to be individuals when it doesn't is, to me, it's dishonest. Like, and it shows that we are, we're messing around. Like, we're not really being serious about this. And like, to go scripturally, like the natural man is an enemy to God and always has been. So is the racist man. That's an enemy to God. And so in order to be a godly person, it means you are an anti-racist person, and you are not going to allow yourself or allow it to be in your homes racist ideas, thoughts, or beliefs. Even if that means you got to sit here and say, okay, so Brigham Young, yes, prophet, this was good stuff. This was not great stuff. And the thing about it that I really want to see more Mormons talking about is like, why do we need all of our prophets to be perfect when like not any other prophet in any other book was perfect? Like, I don't understand how we go from David and Goliath is David and Bathsheba. And he spent his whole life writing the Psalms and the songs and apologizing for all the stuff that he did. He started off well. Why don't we give ourselves the same permission to be imperfect and then to use the rest of our life saying, search my heart, oh God, and tell me if it's me. Am I still messing up? Like, how? I talk so much about Peter and how much of an individual, like knucklehead that he was, not just once, but like multiple times. And God still came back for him. I wish that I had been with Jesus and cut somebody's ear off and then was like, I don't know him. Who? No, 3 different times. Peter was like, I don't know him. But mind you, did violence to save that man's life in the moment. And then because he was scared, said, I don't know Jesus like that. Cock-a-doodle-doo. And he was like, oh no, Jesus was right. Like, the cock-a-doodle-doo moment is coming. If we don't get it together, and if we don't stop denying the people that we say we want to save, the rooster is going to crow, and you will see who we have denied one too many times. And we have denied and we have disgraced our covenants as a covenant people. Like, I don't come from an individualistic culture. I come from people who are trying to do temple work to connect families after enslavement. I come from people who are trying to understand, how do I find my family members on property records and in wills, because they weren't people. And so, well, it's an individual thing. Okay, well, individually go do the work of reparations. Like, I don't know, individually or collectively, I don't care. Go do it. I need people to understand, you know what, my family, we were enslavers, and these are the records that I have. I want to try and help you find your family. Thank you so much. Turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the fathers to the children. Like, do the work. Anytime we start trying to excuse ourselves and remove ourselves and give ourselves distance, it's because we don't feel safe. This work is not safe work. It's never been. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been founded in the US at the height of chattel slavery. That's not a safe time to come out and say, hey, Black people can can be equal and go on missions. How did we end up being bold then, but not bold now? What's the benefit? And to whom? Right? Like, we have to have those conversations consistently. And I've got to be able to look at somebody in the face and say, listen, I know that that person has my back and that they see me, that they're going to speak up to something. They're going to shut down something. They're going to make sure that there's no safe place that they've created that hate, ignorance, bigotry, racism, sexism, transphobia, heterosexism, like none of those places are going to be allowed if they're in relationship with me. It's no longer about the individual. Christ sacrificed himself individually for a collective. That wasn't, oh, well, he just did that for himself. He most certainly did not. He did it for all people. And as such, if I'm trying to be like Jesus, I'm not trying to die for everybody, but can I die to racism? And can I die to sexism? And then can I die to the internalized racism and sexism inside of me so that I can help other people? Come on now. Like, we're being foolish and we're just looking for exit strategies. And there are none. Like, it's time to stop doing that. And it's time to start doing the work.
Thank you so much for that. Professor Williams, you make clear in those final remarks that there is a difference between claiming I'm not a racist and undertaking the work of anti-racism, which I think is a powerful message that transcends the particularities of the LDS Church and faith. We are, after all, a public state university who can transmit truths and wisdom from our community and receive truths and wisdom from outside our community. And so I really appreciate so much of what you've brought to us in your very rich presentation today. One final remark about a term that I wrote down from your presentation about own group loyalty as opposed to humanism. And I think one of the many things you've brought out for us today is that those two forms of loyalty to one's own group or to humanity need not be mutually exclusive, and that the real task is bringing your group in tune with the humanity that you are and that you wish to serve. So I want to thank you once again for a really remarkable and rich presentation, for your incredible responses to our incredible students, and to thank all of you watching from afar, to remind you that if you haven't seen the whole presentation, or if you want to watch it again, you can see it right where you are on that same YouTube page. Please tune in once again on April 1st when Joanna Brooks joins us, and then later on for a roundtable, date and time TBD, when Professor Williams, Professor Brooks, W. Paul Reeve, and Peter Coviello all come together for a cage match to the death. And I will hopefully see you all then. Thank you.